All right, so obviously this is the first episode here of a completely new show that I think hopefully will help a lot of people kind of break into the international basketball space. And the goal here is really just to bridge the gap a little bit, right? Like I've noticed in traveling a lot of places, and you guys have traveled as well, that a lot of times like it's just natural to be kind of stuck in your own little bubble, especially basketball wise. And the more that we can start to expose international basketball to Americans and then also do the opposite, where we can start to show a little bit more of the details of what's going on here to people who maybe have never been to the States, never played, never watched intently in the States, the more we can kind of, grow as a basketball community. So we won't be going into the super details of much. It'll be mainly talking about the tactics, the business, the culture of everything at a level that is not too difficult to understand, but very interesting things to understand. And we'll have guests on the show. We'll have a ton of different topics that you guys will get to hear and kind of recount a lot of experiences that we've had as well. So I'm excited. And I think a lot of this has stemmed from our recent trip to both Paris and Belgrade. My guy Cam was on both of those. Zoran met us in Belgrade here the last, where that was a couple weeks ago for the Partizan Red Star Derby. And just realizing, like, number one, how much of an exponential growth we're starting to see over there. And number two, how little people actually know about it. Really kind of, I guess, cued us to dive into these things on hopefully a platform that begins to grow. And I want to start a little bit by talking about that Belgrade trip. We'll get into Paris a little bit later, but talking a little bit about what really goes down in Serbia. I think like there's this curiosity that's beginning to grow that I've seen about Serbian basketball after that Olympic performance that kind of put everyone on watch. And the more that we kind of dive into what's going on over there, I think people will be able to take some things and not only become interested in it, but also start to apply some cool tactics and the culture over there. So Zoran, our guy right here at By Any Means Zoran, go check him out, is he's Serbian, lives in Toronto, but is very ingrained into, at least more than us, what's going on over there. So Zoran, if you want to give a little bit of background on what Serbian basketball is about at, I guess, the surface level, what makes it so great. And then we can kind of recount our experiences as to how we saw those things when we're actually over there.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks for having me on. I grew up in Toronto, but my background is Serbian, so I did spend a lot of time there. I have a lot of family there and played a lot of hoops growing up, worked with a lot of trainers, and I got a good feel for the difference in the culture around basketball between Serbia and Toronto, the GTA, because Toronto is also, I'd probably say, a different hoops culture than the States or whatever. A couple of things that I noticed, there's probably three or four main things. Number one, I noticed that they play it a lot more like soccer. Soccer is probably like the favorite sport of Serbians, I would say. And so for some reason, they play basketball more like soccer. It's a lot more ball movement, there's a lot more passing. It isn't so glorified to take somebody one-on-one ISO, which I really like it. I think it's one of those things, like me growing up, I always tried to be that person that would, be pass first and instill that culture in the teams that I played and coached on. But it was so tough because everybody here seems to be more focused on ISO. Number two, I kind of realized that people in Serbia, for some reason, or not just Serbia, this is kind of more of like the Balkans in general. So you can count Slovenia, Macedonia, Bosnia, any of that kind of whole region. But a lot of them are kind of more. There's this one word that we've been hearing over and over again in our trip. I want to test you guys to see, how would you guys describe the word "enot"? What would you guys say?
I've been hated on for on YouTube when on the EuroLeague vlog for trying to explain it. So if you are a really just Balkan person listening to this, don't hate on me. I think what I've picked up on the definition or the concept of it and talking to a lot of people is if somebody says that you can't do something, you are then more motivated and want to be an unstoppable force that can then do that thing to prove them wrong. Um, I think how I've seen it better is like in examples that people have given. But I think that if I had to put it into words, people throw out the word spite, which I don't know if that's like the exact meaning that I've gotten from people when talk to them, but I would say that's probably the best way that I can describe what I have heard.
For me, I would say, like, in another sense, it's really just having that chip on your shoulder is how I always have kind of looked at it since we've learned about it. Obviously, you can go with spite, you can go with whatever you kind of want, but I do think it transcends across a lot of different cultures, but it definitely is something that, the Serbian people have been able to come around together and kind of push them forward, whether it be, in basketball or just in life in general. And I just feel like it, comes from you guys being doubted throughout a lot of things, going through wars and everything that you guys as a people have gone through. And it just seems like you guys constantly have that chip on your shoulder that just kind of motivates you to do things that people kind of peg that you want to be able to do.
100%. Yeah. There's some, it's like you can say the word spite, but it's not really the same. And yeah, like you said, the only way to kind of see it, to understand it, is to see it or to experience it. But another good example that I could give is Djokovic, for example, probably the top tennis player of all time. He does this thing where whenever the crowd's booing him, he does it. He's like conducting with his fingers, because he actually enjoys that sound of people booing him. He enjoys the trash talking. He like feeds off of that energy, and that just kind of like whenever he's tired or he's unmotivated or whatever, he just thinks back to that and uses that as like an extra boost to the battery pack of, winning the match or getting a workout done or whatever it is. So I think it's one of those things that's you're not born with, like, yeah, like you could say you're born with it, but I think it's one of those things you can develop, especially as like a young athlete growing up. If you just like find ways to motivate yourself, I don't think it should be like the main motivator, but if you can use things like that to add to your battery pack, I think it's super beneficial for everybody. But yeah, so that's another thing I noticed. So the last kind of thing I was gonna say is, for some reason, there's like everybody's a try hard over there. I don't know why. Like you guys saw we were in those runs, and it was like 40-year-old, 50-year-old guys just like clearly not playing basketball, not even like exercising on the daily. Like that's probably the only exercise they get the whole
Four
week.
beers
But they
deep.
were 4 beers deep. Like they were going so hard. And it's actually kind of surprised me as well. Like I only thought like people just in pickup or whatever go hard, but to see those guys going hard in their like weekly runs was pretty impressive to me. And so I think like just losing is one of those things that I'll say kind of that the whole Balkan region hates. They always try to be winners, and I don't know, honestly, I don't know where it comes from, but those are kind of the three main things that I've seen growing up difference wise. And so when I train my athletes here in Toronto, I try to like find ways to instill those mindsets into them. And it's really hard because it's like growing up in Toronto, it's super multicultural, super diverse, super different cultures, mindsets. And you're coming out here trying to influence them with a specific mindset. So it's something I've been trying to figure out how to do. I'm working on it, but yeah, I think it's good for everybody to kind of take a note from, learn something from it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. And I mean, when people ask, this is all from an outsider's perspective, clearly, but somebody who's been to Belgrade twice this year and experienced a decent amount of like the Balkan mindset. When people ask why Serbian basketball is so good, I think if you bring all of those things together that you just mentioned, it can explain a lot of it. You have super high IQ between a proficiency and understanding of soccer mixed with literally the godfathers of European coaching and some of the best coaches of all time come from Serbia. And that's just part of the culture as well, like high IQ, well coached basketball. So you have super high IQ, you have that ENOT that is, again, kind of a tough thing to explain, but just the driving force, that underdog mentality at all times. Um, and then you have also one thing that I guess is, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. It's pretty simple. The collectivism of the culture of just like our Western mindset is more individualistic. Uh, Over there, I've experienced a lot more like, yes, I want to win, but it's not for me. It's because I want my like group or I want my collective to win. And then when you mesh all of that together with your third point, which is like nobody's trying to really look too cool. Everyone's willing to be playing hard as shit at all times. Plus, genetics and just strong ass people, athletic people, you get pretty good basketball players. And you get really good basketball teams, which is the coolest part. And then with that creates, all that tradition, all that history, all that success, and all the cultural and political factors that come into it. Those kind of put themselves on display rather with Red Star and Partizan, which is the game that we went to. It was a derby, eternal derby. Um, Basically, all of Serbia, I mean, you could say whatever, 90%, better than me, is a fan of one of these two teams, and it gets real. Like, I mean, I think this environment, people have seen it on social media, I'm sure, like games in Europe or whatever. But this is one of those environments where it's like, it just feels different. You could have 20,000 people cheering in America and 20,000 people cheering in Serbia at this derby game or really any big game. And there's just a different like vibe or I guess aura as you would say these days in the gym, right? And I think that comes from passion, that comes from a lot of things. Um, but it's something you almost have to feel to really experience like the difference behind it. And this is a topic that gets brought up a lot, but I want to hear you guys' opinions on not even necessarily talent wise. So I'm not even talking about winning or losing, but if an NBA team were to come to Belgrade and play in that arena, I don't necessarily think it would be the same level of intensity because it's not like a rivalry. But let's just say that there's like a derby environment going on in there. How do you think the average American mindset or team mindset in America would do in an environment like that?
Assuming we're just dropping a team, and they have no time to prepare, I don't think that they're going to do that well on average. You obviously have not only just the rules format that's going to be different. They're now dealing with, a big, blocking the rim at all times, but you're just the energy in there, the passions are at an all-time high when you step into Belgrade Arena, and they start chanting from an hour and a half before the game versus when I go to NBA games to shoot for athletes and everything. The stadium's empty an hour and a half before. You're warming up and you can hear your coaches, you can joke around and you feel comfortable. I don't think that's going to happen if you drop your average NBA team in Belgrade. It's just they're not going to be ready for that environment and some of the hostility, and just overall passion that the opposing fans can provide.
For sure. And I think the coolest thing about FIBA rules is that it becomes a little bit more of an equalizer for individual talent gaps, right? And of course, like this conversation has been had a ton of times since the Olympics. We're like Team USA is the most talented team that there will probably ever be or may ever be. And it'll potentially stay that way for years and years and years. And when you are playing with less space, uh, shorter games, different rules around fouls and physicality. And we see it at the EuroLeague level where like you can be up close to the game. That's one of the coolest things about going to these games. We'll talk about that with Paris later. You just like, I don't know whether it's like hearing freaking bodies collide and like, or the ground get hit or whatever it is, but you can just feel like the intensity at a higher level. So like that's one of those things where it's like FIBA rules kind of allows a little bit more of an equalization of talent, or that gap to be closed, I guess you could say. And again, I'm not saying like an NBA team would go in there and lose, but you would probably see a pretty damn good game with a well coached Serbian club with 20,000 passionate fans behind them. I think that's a no brainer, and it's something that again, if you don't believe it, once you step into that arena, you'll probably see what we're saying. Real quick, Zoran, do you have anything else about we'll talk about Serbian hoops, EuroLeague, the culture a ton moving forward. It's always kind of at the forefront, but I think now I want to move on to Paris basketball, which is another place that actually we just came back from, but more so is relevant because Paris basketball in their first year in EuroLeague are currently on a 9-game win streak, and they're not really just squeaking by teams either. They're beating pretty much all those teams by an average of 8 points. So they're blowing past teams, good teams as well. And I want to talk a little bit about how a team that literally just moved up from Euro Cup and with potentially the smallest budget in EuroLeague and probably the least like big names in EuroLeague are starting to dive in. So we're going to have our guy Gabe, who I know has been really tapped in with Paris basketball this season, talk a little bit about some analytics, some trends, and what makes these dudes so damn good.
Yeah, I think the thing with Paris that a lot of people might not know is the main core guys have been playing together for the past 2 years. They started off in Bonn, in Germany, about 2 years ago with their first season. And they had TJ Shorts, Colin Malcolm, Tyson Ward, and then Sebastian Herrera. And I might be missing a couple more guys, but they had those core group of guys playing together for the past 2 years. And then they, joined Paris last year, and now they are with obviously Paris this year in the Euro League. And the thing that makes these guys truly special is they have a blend of both worlds. They have a blend of the American game, and they have a blend of the European game. And the pace that they play at is the highest pace that anybody's ever played at. Last year, they recorded the highest pace out of any team in the world, including NBA teams. That was a stat. This year, they are playing again at a high pace. And as I'm pulling up these stats right now, the thing that we have noticed this season is in transition, they have the most possessions in transition, and they spend the most time in transition percentage-wise out of the whole entire Euro League. They also shoot the ball extremely well from three in transition. So a lot of times when teams are playing in transition, they look to get the rim run. Paris oftentimes is shooting the three. And while that does drop their overall percentage in terms of field goal percentage in transition, it still results them in scoring a lot amount of points, or at least scoring the most or up there for the most points per possession because of the three ball and how much they shoot it in transition. So that is something to keep an eye on with them. And then another thing as well is they are also shooting the most or second most threes in the league. I think this might have switched as of yesterday, pulling that up here really quickly. But they shoot, let's see, they're second in most attempts. So the team that has the most attempts right now is Bayern Munich. They are shooting on average 31 threes per game. And right now we have Paris in second at 29. And they had the record earlier this year of 52 three attempts in one game. So we noticed that they are hunting the three literally any single possession. But the thing is, though, is they put so much pressure on the rim that it's opening up these 3 points attempts, and they're honestly getting a lot of great looks from behind the arc.
And I think the coolest thing about this, or one of the coolest things, is that they lost their head coach last year, who came from Bonn, went to the Memphis Grizzlies as an assistant now. You can see some of the influence there. And Thiago Splitter comes in, and not only have they maintained, but picked up their performance even, which shows the power of autonomous players who pick up the system to such a deep extent that they're able to keep that going. And also is a very, very we got to tip our hat to Coach Splitter for being adaptable and walking into a system and running it in a really, really, really effective way. And I would say the biggest things, and you alluded to pretty much all of these things that make Paris basketball so fun to watch and so intriguing and just unique from a EuroLeague standpoint, is their pace. Again, seeing this up front in the game that we went to against Zalgiris was very, very, like, I knew how fast they played and you can watch them on TV, but seeing, like, as soon as they get it out of the rim on a made shot, they're going down court and you can see all five guys just like sprinting down the court looking for a three ball. So their pace is insane off made and missed baskets. Their shot selection is unique, especially with guys like Nadir Heafy, who can basically take any shot they want and they are empowered to do so. And it pays off. Like, some of the shots are not necessarily the shots that most European basketball coaches or clubs would be looking for, but they've been winning and they've been making those shots partially because there's a belief in those really talented shot makers to do so. How conceptual they are is also interesting. Like, most European teams, when you watch them, will have a little bit more of a structure, I guess. Paris has they have a structure, and you'll see these same patterns kind of come in and repeat themselves. But a lot of it is, again, putting freedom into the players' hands to do so, which is why it makes it easier for a new head coach to step in, and then they just pick up essentially where they left off, because these players are super autonomous, and as long as the coach is guiding them and giving them freedom, they're able to continue to kill it, like, conceptually. And I think that's a trend that we're going to see more. And a lot of this, like, there's always been something said about, like, Obradovich's teams, how well they flow. And if you watch Partizan, like, last few years, their offensive flow, like, everything just kind of like works in harmony, right? And I think Paris is kind of up there in the same category where, like, as soon as that ball screen needs to come in, let's say they're getting it off of swing pass from the strong side, that the ball screen is coming in there at the perfect time. It's like a handoff into the ball screen at the perfect time. If they get into, like, a little blind pig action, like, you see that pass happening at the perfect time for that guard who's being pressured to come off the backside for a handoff. Like, all these things happen with incredible, super precise timing, and it creates this really beautiful flow to watch in the offense. And then the last thing I want to bring up that you may find unique as you're watching, and I would encourage all of you guys to go watch full games, is the ball screen creativity and frequency. And I saw a stat on TJ Shorts that he is in the 99th percentile in the world in ball screen frequency. So TJ Shorts is basically using ball screens, pick and rolls, more than anyone else in the world. But it's not always maybe something we'll see in the NBA where it's just like, okay, high ball screen, big comes up, set a screen, play. They're getting into these off some really creative options. They'll go like a double Iverson into a ghost, and then a ball screen comes. They're constantly, like, twisting those ball screens. They play off ramp screens a decent amount. So, like, these ball screens are super creative, and that creates that chaos and I guess confusion, and keeps defenses on their toes as they're defending these ball screens. And I know, Cam, you were mentioning a little bit about, like, the depth that they have as well, which allows them to play at this fast pace. So I'm interested in some insights you have on that.
Yeah, so while obviously TJ has been electric, even winning EuroLeague MVP honors for last month, which we can get into later, it's not just him. You really have to compliment Coach Splitter, like you said, coming into the situation, not only maintaining but elevating the Parisian squad. And it's been a group effort. He runs a 11-man rotation, which you're not going to see often in any level of basketball. Madolo, that's a key contributor off of the bench, having played over 8-9 seasons in EuroLeague. He's logged 15 or more points in 3 out of the last 4 games. So key contributors like that is why Paris is on this 9-game win streak and is able to come out of Euro Cup and immediately dominate and take the league by storm. Even in their last game against Maccabi, the bench netted 47 points, one more point than the starters with 46. And everybody in their rotation, they're all 11 guys in the rotation played at least 10 minutes and nobody played more than 26 minutes. So it's really a group effort for the Paris squad, and it'll be something to monitor as playoffs comes into play and the season heats up. And we'll see how injuries come into play. Maybe their guys stay healthy because they're not being asked to give a significant amount of minutes every night. But it'll definitely be interesting as you get into key games to see are guys playing less minutes, are guys like Shorts and Nadir playing a lot more minutes than they're used to, and how does that adjustment come into play and affect performance?
Do you guys if I remember correctly, did you guys say they do like consistent substitutions with like time blocks?
Yes. So one thing you'll notice is that they sub almost in a, I don't want to call it robotic because that has a negative connotation, but like they have planned out substitutions, which is interesting. It works. Um, I would imagine it takes some getting accustomed to as a player. Like if you're going to go in for 2.5 minutes at this point, number one, you can go hard as shit during that time, but being able to create a rhythm in a small period of time that is already pre-planned has to be a tough adjustment. But clearly, these guys have done a good job. And to Cam's point, I would imagine like that would start to switch up towards the postseason where they start to play a little bit more off momentum. But I'm interested in that. And I'm interested in general how they're going to perform in the postseason. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this because the whole thing, and I've been hearing this, I've posted a few things about Paris this year. And there's always like, oh, it's kind of a fad, like it'll work for now. And you hear this about every team that plays fast, shoots a lot of threes. Pacers last year in the NBA, every D'Antoni team to ever exist. You have college teams that do this as well. And usually they do underperform in the playoffs. And the reasoning is can't live and die by the three. If you enter a tough environment, are you really going to be able to shoot at a high clip? I don't know the answer to this because we've never seen this in the EuroLeague. I will say, like when they played at Partizan, I believe, and I could be wrong about this. I just remember seeing when they played in one of the bigger crowds, they shot like 30-ish%. They still won, I believe, and held them to a pretty low score. I don't think it was Partizan. I think they played them at home. I would have to check, but I remember seeing a little bit of correlation between like these bigger games, bigger arenas, whatever, and shooting percentage, although they still smoke these teams. So I'm interested in you guys' thoughts on how they will succeed in the playoffs once these games get really pressure filled and once they're playing against probably more quote unquote talented teams in 5-game series.
I think one thing to also note is defensively, they are very, very good. They do a
Yes.
phenomenal job of keeping TJ Shorts off of bigs. And when TJ does get stuck on a big, they do a great job of switching on the backside and avoiding that. And their pressure defensively is honestly flustering a lot of guards. Their pressure, they keep the pressure on the whole entire game. I might be butchering his name, but Atara, 24. He is very good defensively and has been a big impact without even scoring the ball a lot in some of the games. And so one thing I think that is going to help them when playoff time comes is their ability to defend and being able to guard multiple positions. A lot of guys can also step out, like we've even seen, Hayes being able to step out and still somewhat contain some higher level guards when they do get switched out. But also they have the most, let me make sure I got this right. They have the most possessions in any team in the league. And so this is also something that's helping them as well. They average the most possessions by 2 possessions right now. So they average 85.8 possessions per game, and Barcelona averages 83. So I think that's one thing that is going to help them out as well is just how many possessions they get. Even if they're not falling, they are going to have other ways to, impact the game and still be able to maybe win some key games down the stretch. But it is going to be interesting as well to kind of see how that plays out.
Real quick, just to correct myself, and I want to hear what you guys think. They haven't really played in any big environments. What I was thinking of is that Partizan game where they were playing at home, but I don't know if you guys saw, like, I guess the Serbs travel well, and literally half the arena was packed out. I think they shot like just over 30%, and then they played Panathinaikos in the big arena in Paris. I honestly don't know the name, but I remember them playing in like the Adidas one is their usual one, and they shot 24% from three, 7 for 29. However, they still won that game, which I think speaks to their adaptability and, again, Gabe, to your point, ability to get stops, find new ways to score, and make it work even when they're in a tougher environment against a good team. So they probably, I think they'll have a challenge in terms of like adjusting to playoff basketball. Playoff basketball is playoff basketball, regardless of where it is. And it's going to always be a little bit more pressure filled. There's always going to be a little bit more thinking involved. They're going to be able to scout more, which I think is tough, but at the same time, since they run a more conceptual offense rather than more like action-based offense and calling plays every time down the court, I think they'll be able to adapt as long as Coach Bluder prepares them well, which I am confident in. And then one thing,
oh, sorry
ahead,
about
Gabe.
that. Cut
No,
you
go ahead.
off. Also, too, last season in the playoffs in the Euro Cup, they did play in some pretty big environments and were
Yeah.
able to, they
Yes.
pretty much had I think, a sweep throughout the whole entire Euro Cup playoffs until I think they lost one game in the finals. I may be wrong on that though, so don't quote me. But I know that they did really well in the Euro Cup playoffs in some pretty big environments. Obviously, it wasn't what they'll be seeing in the Euro League, but still, these guys have been built for it. Like TJ Shorts and the core that they've had since Bond have been playing in some pretty big environments. So I don't think that will affect them. I think it'll just be if they can stay healthy and if they are able to shoot well, especially when it gets to the Final Four. It's one game, and you're done. So they really have to make sure that they are shooting
Yes.
well when the time does come.
And winning is a skill, right? And the coolest thing about European basketball is like with the promotion system, we can see if the cores stay together, which obviously doesn't happen as much as NBA. Winning is a skill, and to see guys and teams win at one level and then stay together like Paris has, that you have a group of players who can win. And of course, winning against Euro Cup competition is different than EuroLeague competition, but you're still winning against really good players. And when these guys get down to close games, they consistently win. Versus what you'll see a lot with like more run and gun teams is they'll either win by a lot or they'll lose, especially as you get down to the playoffs. So I think just having guys like TJ who are clear winners, they're scrappy, like again, not the tallest guy in the world, nor is Deer, nor are really any of these guys the most talented on the floor, but they know how to win. I think will help them down the stretch.
Yeah, and just one last point around the shooting. A lot of their guards have like the ultra green light, and I wonder if that ultra green light will turn into an extra ultra green light once they come into that like either game 5 or that Final Four where it's like this is the game, and you can take all these crazy shots, and I wonder if they're gonna I wonder what kind of mentality, what kind of effect it's gonna have on their mentality. I'm curious to see if they really shine under the lights.
Yes, and we will see. But the one thing that we do know is that TJ Shorts is, at least I have the hunch of this, he will keep up his play and leadership. That's the biggest thing that struck me about TJ watching in person was like little things that you don't see on TV, like going over to the ultra section and like hyping him up, and like a teammate falls down, he sprints across the court to help him up. Comes off, like we're sitting right near the bench, comes off and goes to the bench and is like literally going through the bench, just hyping everyone up. And I think when you have a guy like that, And when that guy is number one, your best player, and number two, a guy who everyone counted out, and you can kind of rally around that, is huge. And that's part of the reason why he just won November EuroLeague MVP. Super deserved. He's averaged 19.6 in November, league high 8.6 assists, which is incredible for being what 26, 27 minutes a game. And then even against Barcelona on the road, top two teams really in EuroLeague, 24, 9, and 3 steals, beating Barcelona by 16. And that was their first home loss of the season. So you see consistent performances like this. And again, like the dude's a winner, Nadir's a winner. Really, the entire team is built up of winners. And I'm excited to see how they are going to progress. He's also averaged an insane PIR, which is actually a good thing to talk about on this first episode, because I know Americans, especially really people who don't really watch EuroLeague, are like, what the hell is PIR? So a brief explanation on that is it's performance index rating. It's a pretty cool stat that just incorporates all the other stats, I guess. And like, I mean, performance index rating, it's literally just a compilation of how well you play. Started in the 90s in Spain to determine weekly MVPs and season MVP. And the formula is pretty simple: points plus rebounds plus assists plus steals plus blocks plus fouls drawn minus the sum of missed field goals, missed free throws, turnovers, shots that you got sent, and fouls committed. So it's literally everything positive you do minus everything negative that happens on the court, which I think gives us, again, not a perfect stat because, we could go into how different things may be weighed differently for different systems, whatever, but it's a pretty solid stat to look at how players are truly affecting the game over the course of all these stats.
Also to note, to add on that, a range between 10 to 20 is like pretty okay. And once you get above 20, then that's like a solid performance. So what would you say TJ was at?
I know, I mean, I'll have to check. Yeah, in November, 25.2.
Yeah, so that's super solid.
For sure. And considering that he's not getting a crazy amount of boards usually, that's very solid. And then the last thing I want to talk about Paris is like the impact that they're having. And I would say this impact manifests itself in a couple different ways. Basketball wise, like tactically, I think you're going to have to see a trend towards their style of play when we're getting halfway through the season and they're the number one team in all of Europe. And not the most talented, smaller budget, weren't expected to be very good, but the system is working, and maybe it'll take a few years to adjust. I think I'm already starting to, I don't know if this is the actual case, but I'm starting to notice some NBA teams run similar actions and concepts, which for the Grizzlies is clear, but like there's always this kind of pulling from European concepts into the NBA. And I think you'll definitely see it at that level where their game is probably fit for NBA anyways. And then throughout Europe, like I would imagine some teams would start to arm their rosters with the personnel to play this fast, conceptual, high 3-point volume basketball. So I think that's going to make its way around at least a little bit. And then culturally, I would say, Cam, you can second or fill in on this as well. But to see the excitement behind the club in Paris was cool because, I mean, you have 3 French teams in EuroLeague, and the fact that Paris wasn't one until this year is, from an outsider perspective, very, very, very confusing or interesting. But seeing again how the city has, which is not really historically like a soccer, sports city in general, it's more like fashion, whatever you want to say with that. People have bought in. You got a nice little ultra section. It's nothing like Belgrade, but like you got people who are passionate about it. You got young people who are like watching them, and I think part of that's the style of play. Part of that is their social media and how they've really done a good job of like making it look cool, which is a big part of like buying in, the youth in the area. And I think, again, this will probably push more people in that area to play basketball, which is dangerous for the rest of the world because France is already a powerhouse. And with more engagement in basketball and a professional team to look up to in the biggest metro area, that's going to be huge.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of good things about the culture there. And I do think that they can kind of use that fashion focus to aid them as well, right? I mean, you've seen what they've done with PSG and soccer and like the Jordan brand and how they've been able to kind of loop that into, no pun intended, like the fabric of their sports culture now, where they're spreading their brand, through really good quality clothing, and now they have, PSG is really a world renowned brand in terms of, Americans looking at it, in terms of people across Europe looking at PSG as this, global brand. And I think Paris basketball has the opportunity to do the same, especially if they are performing the way they are. If they can keep that up, obviously they had to invest a lot coming up from Euro Cup. And we'll that'll be something to monitor. They're on a 1-year license. There were some rumors before they got that wild card about, them meeting the minimum budget requirement, but they smashed that out the window, increasing their budget from 9.25 million euros the season before in Euro Cup to over 18.8 million. And
Wow.
to give a comparison, Monaco, a little bit more established in EuroLeague, obviously compared to Paris. They're at over 29 million, but they did surpass Asvel, who had to decrease their budget to 16.2 million. And their payroll for Paris sits at around 5.6 million compared to 5.5 for Asvel. But again, Monaco has kind of set the bar in France with the payroll of 14.7, but they also kind of have the benefit, as you know, of that tax free kind of loophole that allows them to, you know, enjoy some advantage over their other French counterparts. But I do think that they have an opportunity, if they can sustain the financial burdens, to and maybe keep that core around them. They can do a lot in terms of impacting the culture of Paris youth basketball. And maybe, like you said, with the style of play, maybe they'll be open to, in the youth levels, not necessarily shying away from some of the smaller guys. I know we talked to some people around, Paris, and oftentimes they go for super tall guys. I mean, you see, a lot of successful basketball players that do come out of France are a little bit more on the taller side, and that was something that we kept hearing, across our youth exploration there. But you see guys like TJ Shorts and Nadir succeeding, in leading a team, to the top of the table. So maybe that'll, really help impact and inspire some of the youth in France, and you'll see a lot more guards coming out of the area as well.
For sure. And I want to give a shout out to the Paris youth system as well. We were able to check out the U21 and U18 practices. And it's really cool to see how they run like the same system as the pro team and do a really good job. We have had a couple guys or one guy last year, Hugo, come over from their UAT team to train and play with us during the summer. So got a little filled in, and we have a couple more guys coming this summer to train with us. And to see the IQ that they've been able to instill in their young players has been great. And I think that's going to be huge because in a place like Paris or France in general, if Paris basketball can play a large part in developing the youth, then you don't have to rely on the amount of imports that a lot of teams, namely Partizan right now, is relying on paying. And you can start to work these athletes up through kind of the youth ranks as well. So I think that's something to look at for sure, is the talent that they're able to produce in the youth system around that way. I'm excited to see how many good players come out of there, especially to your point, smaller guards. I think French guards are probably the best guards that Europe produces for the most part. A lot of them fall through the cracks because unfortunately the system favors bigs, as Cam mentioned, or like larger wings. But if you look at like Sylvan Francisco, Nadir, TJ, Frank on Partizan, like a lot of these guards are pretty like fluid, talented guards. And I think as that becomes a precedent in French basketball through teams like Paris, that'll be big. The real question is going to be once these guys ask for more money, how that's going to happen. If TJ is going to be able to get paid, if Nadir is going to be able to get paid, that's going to be the big thing that I guess we'll kind of decide their future. So yeah, we'll see how it happens. And I'm excited to watch how the rest of the season plays out. So that's a little bit of I guess an intro for first episode. We'll talk a little bit about some fun conversation points on the next one. Our ideal starting five for European basketball teams. A little bit about how some players are transitioning to EuroLeague from the NBA and how those transitions happen the best. Really, just as players cross cultures in general, how they can maximize their chances for success. So I'm excited to keep getting some cool perspectives from everyone, get some guests on here, and keep this show going. So appreciate everyone for tuning in. Appreciate you guys for delivering some good insight, and we will see you guys next time.